The following program contains the opinions of the host, guests, and call-in participants. These do not necessarily represent the views of this show's distributors or sponsors. This program may contain obscene, profane, or otherwise objectionable language. Viewer discretion is advised. Hey, good evening, everybody. Coming to you cordless. It's Monday night, August 12th, 2024. It's 11 p.m. on the East Coast of the United States, 8 p.m. on the West Coast, and here where I'm sitting, northeast Minneapolis, it's 10 p.m. Central Daylight Time, and welcome to another edition of Jim Peters at Night. I am Jim Peters. This is episode number 148, if you're keeping score at home. Okay, so we have a very big show for you tonight, which means that I can't talk very long. Geoff Shepard is our guest. He's the guy who's done the documentary called Watergate Scandals and Betrayals. Last Thursday, which was the 8th, if I'm right, was the 50th anniversary of Richard Nixon resigning the presidency, August 8th, 1974. So that night, on Thursday night, Geoff Shepard was on Tucker Carlson. 2.5-hour interview. All right, next interview he does, believe it or not, me. So I've been joking all week about the fact I get Tucker's sloppy seconds, and I do, but I'm happy to do that. So I'm bitching and moaning about the fact that he talked to Tucker for 2.5 hours. Who's going to watch that? Well, we did the interview this afternoon, and my interview is 1 hour and 53 minutes. So who am I to complain? Which means, we have a 2-hour time limit here because of the places we broadcast. So I don't have much time to yak here at the top, and I'm not going to be doing any yakking at the end. So just let me tell you right now, Geoff Shepard is our guest, and we're going to hear from him in a couple minutes. Oh, and I got to tell you, this is really important because, first of all, this was a seminal moment in American history, not just political history, but cultural history too. And this guy was there. He was the deputy counsel for Nixon personally during the Watergate debacle. And also, what was I going to say? Let's just leave it at that. Okay, so we're taking the rest of the week off. This has been long planned. We're coming back next Monday. That's the 19th. It's the first night of the Democratic National Convention. We have special shows planned all week that week for the convention. But what I'm going to tell you, I've been kind of sort of promoting this, not really for certain. We are not going to start an hour early like I thought we were going to. I was kind of sort of making plans that we were going to start at 10 p.m. Eastern. No, we're going to start each show next week at our standard 11 p.m. starting time. So when we won't be waiting, though, like we did for Trump's speech to end on Thursday night. We're not going to wait for Kamala. No, we're just going ahead at 10 o'clock. Whatever she wants to talk about is fine. That's fine with me. So this interview is not just like you get to hear history firsthand from somebody who was there. First of all, I'll tell you, he did break some news. He explained in detail, quite great detail at the end, how the 18-minute gap showed up on the tape. So no mystery anymore. It was not a conspiracy theory. It was literally a technical malfunction, but they had a really hard time tracking it down. Also, he will explain the various conspiracy theories that I've been promoting about the fact that he kind of sort of answered the question, kind of sort of about how if this whole thing was a complete setup from start to finish, how did they actually what if they didn't catch the guys breaking into the Watergate? What if they didn't catch them? A guy named Frank Wills actually caught those guys. He was the security guard on duty. What if he didn't? But what's interesting? Geoff says, and you'll hear in just a minute, he says that that it's almost like kind of what they did with the Trump shooting. It's like they kind of left the door wide open, not both figuratively and literally, to get caught. It's so he says he's never really bought these theories and he's not propagating them, but he says they certainly do make some sense. I mean, there is some rational basis for this. So, anyway, yeah, we're going to hear from him. I wanted we don't have time to play our commercial or do our Conk News commercial. I just want to visit Conk News. It's the single best news aggregator on the internet. It's at conk.com. There's our promo for our sponsor. I will see you. I'm not coming back after the interview. I will see you next Monday. I hope you guys have a nice week. I'm planning on a lot of work. We got a lot of stuff going on over here. So anyway, yeah, I hope you have a nice week. I'm going to run a little 12 seconds of bumper music. And now, Geoff Shepard. Here we go. Joining us from his office outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Geoff Shepard, the author of 3 books on Watergate and the new documentary, Washington's Watergate Secrets and Betrayals. Hi, Geoff. Nice to see you.
Hi, Jim. It's good to be with you tonight.
Yeah, sir. And thank you so much for joining us. So I got a whole bunch of questions. Needless to say, that's why we do this. First of all, okay, you worked with Nixon, right?
Oh, yes. 5 years on his White House staff.
And I assume you met with him personally, right?
Officially, but there were no personal interchanges.
Oh, okay.
We didn't pal around together.
Right.
I was staff. I saw him, I think I counted it up once, 22 times, doing programs in the cabinet room, doing presentations in the Oval Office, taking groups in. But we didn't shoot the breeze. There was none of this how's the wife and kids stuff. Right. I was a worker. He liked my work, but that's what I was there for. I was there to work.
Well, can you give us some idea? Did you meet with him enough to, can you summarize his personality? I mean, specifically, let me say, a lot of people said he was a paranoid individual. Do you think that's true?
No, I don't think so at all. He was picked on incessantly from the time he first got to Congress in 1946. He was an outsider. He defeated Jerry Voorhees, a 5-term congressman from California, who had been voted the most popular congressman by the Washington, D.C. media. And this guy, this person from nowhere bumped him off. And then he runs the investigation of Alger Hiss, and he exposes Hiss as a communist spy, and he gains nationwide recognition. Then he runs for the Senate, and his opponent is Helen Gahagan Douglas. She's a Hollywood starlet. When she was a congresswoman, she had an outrageous public love affair with Lyndon Johnson, and he beat her by 16 points. She's the one who invented the phrase "tricky dicky," and he's the one who came up and said she was pink down to her underwear. I mean, it was a vicious campaign. And then he becomes vice president under Dwight Eisenhower. But he had upset the Eastern liberal establishment, and they never forgave him. When he came into town in 1968, when he'd been elected in 68, inaugurated in 69, he was opposed by every institution in Washington, D.C. The Congress, the media, the Hill staff, the federal bureaucracy, everybody. He was not a well-liked guy. And of course, when he lost to Jack Kennedy in 1960, it was easy to say, well, you aren't charismatic. Jack was charismatic. Why aren't you more friendly? Well, Nixon was an intense, hardworking, deep-thinking, accomplished politician, particularly in foreign affairs. And the other side didn't want to recognize that. And the other side controlled everything. There were 3 networks, NBC, ABC, and CBS, 2 very powerful weekly news magazines, Time and Newsweek, and one dominant nationwide newspaper, the New York Times. All six headquartered within 6 blocks of each other in Midtown Manhattan. So we talk today about the narrative, and you're getting more than one. You get talk radio, you get podcasts, programs like yours. We didn't have anything like that those days. And all you got was the New York point of view. And it was coming right out of Midtown Manhattan. So was he palsy-wowsy? Did he have a good sense of humor? Sure, but he didn't show that. He was a very serious, studious, accomplished president, one of our greatest presidents.
Yeah. Do you think he won those races because of his personal intensity? I mean, I'll just say this offhand. He didn't come off to me, in the press as an awkward individual, but he did not. He wasn't embodying charisma either. Do you think he won those?
Well, he outworked his opponent.
Right.
Jerry Voorhees had never run into anything like this. Nixon wouldn't stop.
Right.
There's that great story in law school. They told him he was going to be a success. He went to Duke Law School after he graduated from Whittier College. And they said, you're going to do just fine here because you've got an iron butt. And the question was, well, what do they mean? Well, you can sit here in the library and study nonstop. And in those days, that's what it took.
Yeah.
And remember what they say about I forgot the guy's name. We'll go on. No.
Okay. So
you get to be 80, you lose names first.
You're 80?
I'm in my 80th year.
Oh my God, you look fantastic.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome. I never did the math. I never bothered to do the math, but you don't look a day over 60 to me. But
well,
you're right.
It's clean living. It's what does it. It's clean living. I graduated from Harvard Law School in May of 1969. And 2 weeks later, I was selected to be a White House Fellow. And the program started in September. So, here I am, 24 years old. My first job out of law school is a member of the White House staff. I stayed for 5 years, happiest time of my life, 14-hour days, worked nonstop. I was there on Christmas Eve. I was there on New Year's Day, and happily so. And then it all turned to ashes with Watergate because it became a albatross around my neck. You worked in the Nixon White House. You must have done something illegal.
Yeah.
And it was really a good start and a heck of a turnaround.
So I was going to leave this till later, but since you already kind of touched on it, I want to bring this up right now. It occurred to me that that in the modern era, which I define as starting in 1960, you have basically 5 presidents who were more or less, I call them disruptive. These were guys, right? You got Kennedy, Nixon, Reagan, Clinton, and Trump. And all 3 of these guys were hassled mercilessly. All 5 of them, I mean. And my contention is that most of the guys who become president, and of course right now they are all guys, most of them, even if they were highly intelligent, and the perfect example to me is Barack Obama, who's an extremely intelligent guy, they still didn't have any talent for actually getting anything done. Those 5 individuals, although they had their definite missteps, seemed to have a talent for getting things done. I'm wondering, is that the reason they're targeted? Because
you go back further. We all think the story started when we walked into the motion picture theater, but it's been going on since the nation was founded. But go back to 1932. 1932 is a Democrat sweep at the height of the Depression. And Roosevelt's elected first to 4 terms, and the House and the Congress, the House and the Senate go deep blue. And that is uninterrupted, except for 2 brief stints. When Roosevelt died, the Republicans retook the House and the Senate for 1 term.
Mm-hmm.
And when Eisenhower was elected in 1952, the Republicans took the House and the Senate one term. All the rest is a sea of blue, except for Richard Nixon. Yes, Eisenhower is a Republican, 52 to 60, but he's a military guy. He could have run in either party.
Right.
It's his vice president, that scoundrel Richard Nixon, who's so political. And then Nixon wins narrowly in 1968. So, and then hugely in 1972. What Democrats could conclude, I think fairly, is it's Nixon the man who's in the way. We've wiped out the Republicans. We've been in control of this great nation almost without break since 1932, except for that guy, Dick Nixon. And we've got to get rid of him. It was very, very personal.
So let's get to the Watergate thing itself right now.
Okay.
What or who, if you're going to go into the assumption that the goal was to get Nixon out of office, who in particular was driving this? Is there one person or?
No. Picture a flock of birds in the sky or a school of fish in the ocean. They dart and swarm and swoop in absolute perfect combination. And there's no memo around that says, here's what we're going to do.
Right.
So in Watergate, there's a conspiracy, but it's not the result of one meeting. It's not led by one guy. Each of the people knows the part when they come out on the stage, and they coordinate it magnificently. But if you want to picture what happened, and this is my view, other people have different opinions.
That's why you're here, man.
Yeah. Picture a triangle. Okay, triangle. 3 points, corners. Those are the three branches of government. Representatives in each of those branches met secretly, coordinated individually to help bring Nixon down. So just say the top point is the executive branch, and you've got two special prosecutors of note, Archibald Cox, Leon Jaworski, and you've got the Watergate Special Prosecution Force, which when it came into effect, the table of organization and employment envisioned 92 people. Okay? This is not a special prosecutor. This is an army. They called themselves Cox's Army, all specially recruited because they hated Nixon. The top 17 leaders of the Watergate Special Prosecution Force, top 17 lawyers, had all worked in the Kennedy Johnson Department of Justice. In its own way, that particular angle at the top is a constitutional inversion. The very people who were driven from office, who lost power when Nixon was elected in 1968, suddenly are back in charge, and they control the Department of Justice's investigation and prosecution ability, not the elected leader. Then drop down, say you go down to the right side of the triangle, and there's the judiciary. And there are three judges in particular that we want to talk about. Judge John Sirica, district court in Washington, D.C., who appoints himself to preside over both the break-in, the burglars trial and the Watergate cover-up trial. And then there's a second judge on the district court, Gerhard Gesell. And Sirica appoints him to preside over the plumbers trial and the perjury trials of several of the Nixon campaign people. And they talked with the special prosecutors all the time. And then the third judge is the chief judge of the D.C. Circuit Court. And he talked to one of the special prosecutors. We'll get into that in a minute. Go over to the left side of the triangle. You've got the Senate Judiciary Committee, and they're the ones who extracted all the promises from Elliot Richardson when he was up for confirmation as Nixon's Attorney General. There's the Senate Irvin Committee, which is televised, gavel to gavel, during Watergate's unfolding, and forms the basis for everybody's public knowledge of Watergate. You can't see the trials. So what you saw was the Ervin Committee. And if you'll forgive my bias, the Ervin Committee has lots of similarities with the J6 Committee.
No shit.
dominated by Democrats.
Yeah.
Absolute refusal to look into any other presidential race except 1972, not 68, when J. Edgar Hoover told Nixon that Johnson had ordered Hoover to bug his campaign plane.
Yeah.
Not 64, when it's confirmed under oath that Johnson got derogatory information on Goldwater's staff from the FBI, and certainly not 1960, when lots of people think the Kennedys stole the race.
As a matter of fact, if you don't mind me bringing that up, Geoff, I'm under the impression now that the accepted version of the 1960 election is that Kennedy, or more specifically his father, stole the race. Do you think that's true?
Well, it's accepted that it is controversial.
Okay.
It's not dismissed out of hand.
Right.
Everybody knows Illinois was just cheating like mad from Mayor Daley of Chicago when all the dead came out to vote.
Right.
Real questions in Texas about how fair that election was down there, and real questions in West Virginia, where the Kennedys bought the primary, beat Hubert Humphrey in the primaries. But it's not universally agreed that the election was stolen. I think it's fair to say it's universally agreed it's subject to question.
Uh-huh.
So you have the Senate, you have Senate Judiciary, Senate Ervin Committee, and then you have the House Judiciary that conducted the impeachment hearings. Elected leaders and staff from all three of those met with members of the Special Prosecution Force in secret to work out details. And at least one of them, we know, met with Judge Sirica. Just to dwell on that just for a second, Samuel Dash, who was chief counsel of the Senate Ervin Committee, taught at Georgetown University, where Judge Sirica taught. They were friends. He'd go down, I'm told, with great frequency to talk to the judge during the unfolding of the Watergate scandal. And he's the one that suggested to the judge, he claims this in his book, that if he'd throw the book at the convicted burglars, remember Sirica's nickname was Maximum John because he would give horrible sentences.
Uh-huh.
If he would do that and then condition possible reduction on appearing before the Ervin Committee, they'd get witnesses. And that's what they were looking for. They were looking for dramatic witnesses. Well, that's just illegal as hell. I mean, these ex parte meetings were going on. And what is so distinctive and what brought me on your show and makes me somewhat popular is these folks at all three angles, all the names I've just given to you, they left a paper trail. They wrote memos to each other documenting what their agreements were. I mean, it's unbelievable that they did it, but I've got the memos. And that's what distinguishes my books and my research from everybody else. We got theories. We got suspicions. We suspect today that there's coordination between the lawsuits against Trump in New York, in Georgia, in Florida, and in Washington, D.C. They're glimmerings, meetings that are tough to explain.
Right.
But we don't have dozens of memos that they are writing to each other, but that's what's come out in Watergate.
Have they learned over 50 years? Is that the reason?
Well, what we've learned over 50 years is you're always dealing with human foibles and the desire to grab and hold on to power. And it goes back to our founding fathers. And, you know, they don't get credit for this. But human nature hadn't changed.
No.
And they were firsthand experience with a terrible monarch. And they developed that constitution with separation of powers and checks and balances to disperse power. And then even then they didn't trust the government. So they had the Bill of Rights, whose design is to protect you from excessive government power. And you could go down almost every single amendment and say today people could question whether Trump is getting a fair shake. What I've gone on to show is there's no question in the world that Nixon and his people didn't get a fair shake. So your Fifth and Sixth Amendments guarantee due process. Due process of law basically says a fair trial. Well, what's a fair trial? Well, it's a fair and impartial judge. It's even-handed, nonpartisan prosecutors who treat everybody the same and they enforce the law in the same way. It's a jury pool that's untainted by pretrial publicity and unbiased by dominance of one political party or the other. And it's an automatic right to appeal to a circuit court, which is equally unbiased. None of those four conditions existed at the time of Watergate, and it's reflected in the memos. Now, what happened, your people, why is it taking 50 years? Why are we sitting here 50 years later and Shepard is screaming like mad he's got the documents? Well, turns out that the three top Watergate prosecutors took their sensitive internal files with them when they left office. You're not supposed to do that. We sue people who take their papers today. Yeah. Back then, they didn't even know they were taken.
Right.
And we had to wait for those people to die and to give their papers in their will to their law school alma maters. And then the alma maters had to take their sweet time arranging them for release to the public. And the first pile didn't become available to researchers until 2013. 40 years after Watergate, Leon Jaworski, he's the second special prosecutor, his confidential Watergate files were reclaimed from Baylor Law School in Waco, Texas, brought back to the archives, and prepared to be made available. And I happened to be hard at work looking at other documents from that same Watergate Special Prosecution Force. And they said, your FOIA request, your Freedom of Information Act request.
Geoff, I was going to ask you about that. I watched the movie over the weekend. So my question is okay, so these dead guys released their files to the universities. So did the National Archives claim them, or what happened?
Well, half and half.
With
Jaworski's papers, they were down at Baylor, and somebody was going through them and said, well, my heavens, these are grand jury transcripts. They shouldn't be in public. And they alerted the archives. The archives went down, took a look, and said, we got to retrieve all these files. And Baylor cooperated, boxed them up, sent them up to the archives. And what the archivist told me was they did a 6-month all hands on deck review to redact the names of the people who weren't indicted, whose names shouldn't become public if they were still alive.
Right.
And they were all ready to make these documents available. A document box to an archivist is an 8.5 by 11 square cardboard, about 3 inches thick, and they fill it with paper. There were 3 such document boxes. The stuff that could be made public that wasn't sensitive, they sent back to Baylor because it was Leon Jaworski's other lifelong pursuits and that sort of thing. So in that instance, the archives fetched the documents, put them on display. They called me and they said, your FOIA request isn't exactly on point because nobody knew he took these files, but we're going to produce them in response because we think these records have to be made public. So I was the first person to go through his.
And that was awfully nice of them, because I know people who put in FOIA requests, and usually the government's like, if you don't do it perfectly, they just reject it. So it was actually kind of
The way they run the Watergate files is in what's called the Special Access section of NARA, the National Archives. And they keep all investigatory records there. So they keep the Warren Commission, they keep Watergate, they keep the Trump impeachment. Remember, there was a Watergate reform that set up the independent counsel, and it turns out there were 19 investigations undertaken under that law. It's expired. And those are all there. Now, they've got to read the memo before they'll release it to you. And they redact the name, not the names of the innocent, but roughly the names of the unindicted.
Yeah.
This is like a closed stack research library. From days of old, there's a card catalog down in the lobby. You flip through the card catalog, you find your book, you give it to the librarian. They go up into the stacks, but you're not allowed in the stacks. Now, you ask for a particular book, but the book you really want but don't know exists may be right next to it, but you're never allowed up there to see.
Right.
So what you got to do, if you go down there as often as I used to, you get to know the archivist, and they can go through the stacks, see? So you say, look, here's what I'm trying to prove. I'm trying to prove Gordon Liddy got to the re-election campaign the first week of December. If that's what you were trying to prove, where would you look? What documents would you ask to be produced? And if you're polite and respectful, they'll say, well, I'd ask for this, or I'd ask for the Gordon Liddy file, I'd ask for something else. So you can frame your FOIA. Now, you've got to make it relatively narrow.
Yeah.
Because if they conclude they're going to have to produce more than 1,000 pages, you go into a special bulk line, and they don't even get to your request for a year.
Right.
So it's a process. Now, I've told others, I spent 27,000 hours over the past 20 years doing all this research. And you can look over my right shoulder, and you can see all those books on the shelves. And that is, to the best of my knowledge, every single book about Watergate written by somebody who was there, because those qualify as primary research. I don't care about books written today from people who are using these original books as their resources.
Right.
I want to hear
how many books is that?
150.
Huh.
About 150. And then what you do, Jim, most of them hate Nixon. Most of them dump all over him. And you skim through, and you make notes, and you put in stickies, Post-it notes, on what we call admissions against interest. It's a legal term. When a witness says something that isn't to their benefit, or something that doesn't seem to fit within their narrative, it deserves extra scrutiny. And you can go through these books relatively quickly looking for aberrations and marking them up. And gradually a picture emerges of unbelievable cheating, unbelievable judicial and prosecutorial wrongdoing. Now, I want to go back to these piles of documents. Second cache of internal documents came from James Vorenberg, was Archie Cox's first hire. He was a criminal law professor at Harvard, and he was brought on the staff, and he had two challenges. He hired all the staff, and he basically hired his friends or friends of friends, because there wasn't time to do full field investigations. So it's Jim Vorenberg's group.
Right.
The second thing he did, he said to Cox, he said, look, when we're through, somebody's got to write the report on what we did. Because when they started out, they had no certainty of getting Nixon to resign. So what I'll do for you is I will take extensive notes at all the staff meetings and all the developments, so I can write the final report when we're through, which he did. And he took those notes with him back to Harvard. He went back and resumed teaching and became dean of the Harvard Law School much later on. Well, those papers he gave to the Harvard Law Library. They're kept in one room at the end of the building called the Treasure Room, and they wouldn't let me see them. And I'd go up, and I got to see Archie Cox's. He didn't have many files, but I got to see him, and I would always ask about Vorenberg's. And they said, well, they're not available to the public yet. So when I put out my second book in 2015, I had a footnote, said Harvard refuses access. And I called them to be sure the footnote was still accurate. And they said, oh, we've just opened them. Come on down.
Do you think they did that because do you think they did that because you called them?
First guy. Well, they don't publish this.
Right.
I was the first guy to get to go through Vorenberg's. Well, let me tell you, he's taken notes for the future, for future use. He's recording when Leon Jaworski, the second special prosecutor, is telling his senior staff about his secret meeting with Judge Sirica. Here's what the judge and I have decided. And then there's other notations, and you get, it's documented proofs, not under oath, documented proof of more secret meetings between the prosecutors and the judges. So, and there's a third guy.
I have to stop you, Geoff.
Sure.
In your movie, and I can't keep the players straight. Is this a part where Sikorsky and
that's not the right name.
I'm sorry.
So it's not Sikorsky.
Yeah.
It's got to be Sirica.
Jaworski, right?
Yeah.
Is this the part where they actually sat down and rehearsed what they were going to say in court?
Well, that comes a little bit later. Let me give you that quick.
It is those two guys, right?
Oh, clearly, no, it's those two guys.
Okay.
Let me give you the quick stream, but we got to come back to these piles of documents. Well, let me do that, and then we'll go to the stream. Okay.
Okay.
So the third pile of documents, cache of documents, was taken by the guy who's counsel to the special prosecutor, very talented lawyer named Phil Lacavara. And he quit early. He quit over the Ford pardon of Richard Nixon. He said, I won't be a party to prosecuting Nixon's people when Nixon's going to get off. I mean, his people were just being loyal to Nixon. I will not prosecute them. Yeah. Noble gesture. Well, he took his papers with him. And I was having lunch with one of the archivists. And he said, well, guess what? We got Lacavara's papers. And he just gave them back to us. And we just got through going through them. I said, do you need a FOIA request? He said, no, they didn't come in that way. So I said, well, can I see them? He said, well, of course. So the next time I went down, I spent a lot of time. He wrote a lot of memos that are really.
I'm assuming you can't leave any of these libraries with these.
Oh, Lord, no. No,
right.
Only guy that could do that was Sandy Berger, the NSC guy for Clinton, who went to the library and stuffed his pants and his socks.
Right,
yeah, Sandy Berger. Boy, let me tell you, that era, I was going down a lot to the archives, and they just clamped down like there was no tomorrow. I mean, you go into the reading room and you've asked, pull this, pull that, and they'll put it on a cart and they wheel the cart to your desk. You can take one document box off the cart. You can open the document box. You can remove one file from the document box, and that file must stay flat on your desk. You can't pick it up to read it. Flat on your desk. Say it's a memo, 10 pages long. If you want to copy it, photograph it, or scan it, you got to go up and get permission, and they give you a little sticker that you put it on your lamp that says, I have permission to copy designated documents. And I prefer to use a scanner. It works best. And when you're there, you got about 4 hours on site. And you got a bunch of documents to go through. So you look, and it's a real quick decision. Scan or don't scan. Scan or don't scan. And you don't read them. There's not enough time to read the memo. So say it's a 10-page memo. You scan. It takes about half a minute to load, scan, unload, put in the next one, load, scan, unload. So you can glance at the first paragraph of the next page, but you got no idea what you're copying.
Yeah.
Go back, you print it out, you put it in order, you highlight the dates, you staple the right memos together, and then for the first time, you sit back and you start reading it. And what happened with me the first time in 2013, when I got back, my goodness gracious, they're meeting with the judge. These are memos recording their meeting. Now, fourth cache of documents is something called the roadmap. The roadmap was the special grand jury report that the prosecutors got the grand jury to adopt and then sent to the Hill so it could be used for Nixon's impeachment. And that was sealed. They had this slick way of showing, of keeping it secret.
Is this the part in the movie where
Yeah.
they're talking about the difference between indictments and presentments?
Yeah.
And I had to look, I had to do a lot of deep dive reading on what a presentment was. I never even heard of that before.
They don't exist, Geoff.
Okay.
No. This is, the documentary. Everybody's got to watch the documentary.
Oh, yeah. Matter of fact, we're going to play the trailer here before we're done.
Okay. It has to touch on all these topics lightly because you're trying to put together a very complex subject
Oh, yeah.
in an hour. So if you take a book, we may have summarized a chapter in a 2-minute segment in the documentary.
Right.
But some of those scenes are just classic. Now, what you're talking about, grand jury information must stay secret forever, even after you die.
Yeah.
Okay. And there's a reason for that. It's because the grand jury functions much like a star chamber. You can't bring your lawyer in. You can't put on witnesses. You don't know what they said about you before you go in. You can't cross-examine their witnesses.
Right.
Their job is to decide if there's probable cause to believe a crime has been committed.
Right.
Then they take action. They indict. If you're indicted, you don't want to be indicted, Jim. If you're indicted, then you get all the protections of the Fifth and Sixth Amendments. They can't bring that stuff untested into court. Got to be brought in under the testimony in person of sworn witnesses, subject to cross-examination, rules of evidence, just all kinds of rights. Go back to Watergate. They conclude, I think fairly, that the law is too unclear for a sitting president to be prosecuted.
Yeah.
Pretty much it's assumed you can't do it, but there's no court holding even today.
And okay, that's what I was going to ask you. My impression is that's more clarified now. You don't think so?
Only because the Department of Justice has opined.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but no court has ruled on that.
Okay, very good.
So they decide. This is a secret meeting between Sirica and Jaworski. And he's telling his staff, we've decided the law is too ambiguous, take too long, so we're going to pursue the impeachment route by the House Judiciary Committee. Well, we've spent all this time and all this work, and we've got all this grand jury evidence against Richard Nixon. And the prosecutors are so arrogant, they conclude the only way for Nixon to be impeached is to ship that to the Congress. But that would violate the grand jury secrecy laws. So the Fifth Amendment has this peculiar phraseology. No person can be charged with a federal crime except by presentment or indictment of a grand jury.
Yeah.
And Phil Lacavara, brilliant lawyer, says, we'll call it a presentment and say that gives us the right to send it to the Hill.
So hold on. So at that time, in 72, 73, there was no legal definition of what a presentment was?
Absolutely true. Now, they were used, and it shows up for a moment in the documentary where Andy Napolitano says, yeah, used frequently at the state level,
yes,
but almost unheard of at the federal level.
Right.
And in truth, it had never been done in the district before or after Watergate. And the Department of Justice had testified within the year that grand juries had no right to issue presentments. Okay. So, but Phil says, we'll call it a presentment. Now, the idea is so bizarre that if we surprise Sirica, he might rule against it without knowing what we're trying to do. That's the scene you see in the documentary where Jaworski is meeting secretly with Sirica. And he says, there's this other thing, Judge. We got this problem. We've got all this grand jury information. We need to get it to the Hill, and we need your permission. Okay.
Yeah.
And Lacavara puts this recommendation for an ex parte meeting, hugely improper, in writing. And then it occurs, and Jaworski puts in writing about his meeting with Sirica. So they send it up to the Hill. Okay. It stayed sealed. And that's a second vignette in the documentary where Lacavara is talking to the deputy, Hank Ruth, and to Jaworski. I'm sorry, talking to Jaworski. And Jaworski says, this presentment idea, walk me through that again. And he says, well, first we get the grand jury to decide they want to do it. Then we go to the judge. So grand jury, then the judge. And Jaworski in this reenactment says, well, what about the White House? And the guy playing Lacavara says, we put it right up there, right under their noses, and they don't know a thing because it's still secret. Well, that's the grand jury report. That's what it was called, the roadmap, because it would lead to Nixon's certain impeachment.
Right.
It stayed sealed until 2018. 5 years ago, for the first time, the public and Nixon's defense lawyers were able to see what Nixon was accused of doing. This is not unlike what's happening in New York, where to get the longer statute of limitations, they had to prove a felony.
Oh, yeah.
And the court held, but you don't have to tell us the felony.
Right.
So your summation at the end of the trial. Well, this is the same thing with Nixon as his defenders. We didn't know what he was accused of. And then when it became public, because of my court petition, it's right there at the top, unsealed by order of the chief judge, and it names my case.
Yeah.
Once public, you can go through and you can read it, and you can pick out that what they alleged was not true. And the only reason we couldn't refute it was because it wasn't public. Okay, so those are the four caches of documents: Leon Jaworski's files, James Vornberg's files, Phil Lacavara's files, and the roadmap that changed everything, became public in the last 10 years, changed everything you've ever been told about Watergate.
Geoff, at the time, were you under any danger of being indicted yourself?
No, I was not. But fortune, I was not involved in any campaign. Okay, I was in law school in '68, and I was hatched a member of the Domestic Council, which is a nonpartisan position, in '72. My policy work was law and order. So I worked on law and order, crime and drugs, closely with the Department of Justice, but never campaigned. I never set foot in the re-election committee headquarters. But just so we understand each other, my immediate supervisor, Bud Krogh, was head of the plumbers. I knew everybody involved. Gordon Liddy was on the same staff I was before he went over to the re-election committee. It's like finding yourself in the middle of a forest fire and somehow emerging unscathed. Now, when it was all over, I functioned as deputy counsel on the Watergate defense team.
Yeah.
Transcribed the tapes. I ran the document rooms. I briefed the presidential counselors on Watergate. I was all over it from the inside. I even testified in the plumber's trial for the government, and I was subpoenaed to testify for the government in the cover-up trial. I mean, I was, you couldn't tell a single story, not a single story except the original break-in, where I'm not intimately involved. And when it was over, truth be told, I was unemployable. You worked in the Nixon White House. Good heavens, you must have done something wrong. Maybe it hasn't come up. So I went to the third special prosecutor who'd been deputy throughout, a guy named Henry Ruth. And I said, this is no fair. I'm unemployable and I didn't do anything wrong. And he said, look, Geoff, you weren't indicted. That's our role, indict or go home. I said, that's not good enough for me. I performed honorably and well as a defense lawyer, and you shouldn't be allowed to do this to me. He said, what do you want? I want a letter. He said, we don't write letters, Geoff. Have them call me. You got a job interview. Have them call me. I said, that won't work in 5 years. I want a letter. And you know something, Jim? I'm the only senior member of the White House staff who has a clearance letter from the special prosecutor saying I was never even a suspect.
Did that save your ass?
Well, I left Washington. I changed careers. I went up to outside of Philadelphia, where I now live, and I started a 35-year career as a in-house corporate lawyer for giant insurance companies. So I got out.
Yeah, you did get out successfully, basically, huh?
Yeah. Now I did two other things just to complete my little role. He resigned unexpectedly. The staff scattered to the four winds, and nobody knew where anybody was going. If you wanted somebody, you'd ask the White House operator to find them, but we weren't in the White House anymore.
Right.
So my secretary had one of the first IBM computer card typewriters. Remember, don't bend, fold, spittle, or mutilate.
Oh, yeah, I remember. Yeah.
So she could reprint a page and change one number. And we started keeping the directory of where our colleagues were going. So you would come to me and say, well, where's John? Where I heard he went back to Kansas. Do you know how to get in touch? Yeah, we got a directory. And then they started coming and telling me where they were going, and we started keeping the list. So I kept, up until very recently, the directory of the policy planning staff, not the campaign staff, because I never campaigned. And we started having annual reunion luncheons. And no press, no public announcement, just friends getting together once a year. After the November election, were the only White House staff, modern times, to hold regularly scheduled annual luncheons. Started out with a list of 80 people. People have passed away, gone on, now it's 30. But this November, after the election, we will have a luncheon and we'll talk about old times all over again.
50th anniversary, big blowout of it.
We'll see.
Yeah.
And then in 2010, I started producing what are called Nixon Legacy Forums. And I would get these guys who worked on some public policy initiative, welfare reform or integration of the Southern schools or the opening of China. And we go down to the National Archives and we would talk on film about a particular project. And almost inevitably, C-SPAN would rebroadcast. And to date, we've done 40 such Nixon Legacy Forums. They're on the Nixon Foundation website. They're on my website. They're down on the C-SPAN's website, Nixon Legacy Forums. And we're again told by the archivist, we are the only modern administration to be producing those. And Nixon had such a successful first term.
Yeah.
We're making a record of it. And then, of course, there's my Watergate obsession. We call it in my household the Nixon obsession. Every day,
Well,
every day,
okay.
all day, all these.
All right, before you go on, just for the youngins, I do have to point out here that what you're talking about, those punch cards, that they used to store information on a uniform stack of basically like cards, business card, or
They look like a library checkout card.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. They do. And there was a stack of them, and there were holes in these cards that basically would tell the computer what to print and what not to print. And it was it was crazy, primitive, but it worked.
It was revolutionary.
Yes,
I think, remember we talked about hanging chads, those little square holes. I think it blew air through them.
Yes, that's right.
I think that's how it worked. They didn't push wires through.
No,
it was if the holes lined up, you could go in 4 cards and then stop. Man, you wouldn't take it apart because it looked like a 2-drawer file cabinet right next to the secretary's desk, and all these thousands of file cards in there.
Yeah,
but it was revolutionary. And Donna Larson, who was my secretary at the time, she had the only such machine in the White House.
Huh.
So we became very popular.
Yeah, I believe it. Okay, so now, Geoff, I want you to go back to you talked about the plumbers several times.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the actual break-in, okay? So here's my question about that, and that is, so, all right, these plumber guys, they broke in. Now, and also my impression is in doing research for this interview, I just found this out, that actually the time when Frank Wills caught them at the water bait was actually the second time they broke in, right?
Yeah, but you're and understandably so, Jim, you're mixing up 2 stories.
Okay.
Let me skim it across the top first.
Right.
The Pentagon Papers, this secret study at the Department of Defense of the Vietnam War, was leaked by a guy named Daniel Ellsberg. It was top secret, but it was prepared by the 3 most senior doves, anti-war people at the Department of Defense. And it undermined the stories and the approach. It undermined the legitimacy of us being in the Vietnam War in the first place.
Right.
So Daniel Ellsberg, who started out a hawk and became a peacenik, leaked it.
He was a psychiatrist, right?
No, don't jump.
Okay.
He leaked it to the New York Times. It comes out in June 1971. It's deemed to be the greatest national security leak of the Cold War. Ellsberg was a consultant to the Rand Corporation and had access to 54,000 other top secret documents. And they're trying to figure out what his plans were. So the White House established a special unit within the White House designed to stop leaks, okay? And it became nicknamed the Plumbers because it was supposed to stop leaks.
Yeah.
And the plumbers were trying to figure out what Ellsberg's intentions were with regard to these other documents. And Ellsberg had been going to a psychiatrist in Beverly Hills.
All right, that's where the psychiatrist thing comes in.
Dr. Lewis Fielding.
Okay.
So, unfortunately, they got the really bright idea of breaking into Fielding's office in Beverly Hills to read his files on Daniel Ellsberg. And they wanted to have some separation from the White House. The plumbers were run right out of the White House. Okay? They wanted some separation, so one of the 2 planners, there are 2 masterminds of the plumbers break-in, Gordon Liddy and his consultant, Howard Hunt. But they were told by the White House, don't get too close to this. We want some separation. And Howard Hunt says, I know some Cubans down in Miami who I used to work with when we were getting ready to invade Cuba. And I was working for the CIA, career officer with the CIA, and I was the mysterious Eduardo who had money and plans for the Cubans. If I go tell the Cubans, this shrink has something to do with Fidel, they'll do whatever we ask.
All right.
They mastermind this break-in into Fielding's office. But when they get there, they can't pick the lock. So Liddy says, break in anyway. We'll make it look like a drug bust. Make it look like you're after drugs from this psychiatrist. They don't find any files on Ellsberg. It doesn't matter. They're not caught. The only problem is there's a police record of the break-in.
Yeah.
And that would go its own way and life would go on. The river would flow down, except for one thing.
Now I have a stupid question just because I'm stupid.
Let me finish, Jim. One other.
Okay. All right.
When they planned the Watergate break-in a year and a half later, in June of 1972, the Fielding break-in is September. When they planned the Watergate break-in in June of 72, they used the same Cubans. So what you had was people for the re-election committee, not the White House staff, but the re-election committee used the same two masterminds, Liddy and Hunt, but you could only trace it to the re-election committee. Bad enough, but it wasn't the White House.
Right.
But the Fielding break-in, if you knew about it, you could trace right into the White House itself. Certainly to Bud Krogh, the head plumber, maybe to his boss, John Ehrlichman, and maybe even to the president himself, who was so upset with the leaking of top security information. So it's little wonder a cover-up started because they were terrified Liddy or Hunt would flip and start talking about the Fielding break-in. Okay? Now we'll go to your question, my friend.
No, that's fascinating because I did not know the thing about Fielding at all. My question about Fielding is, and this is kind of stupid, but I'm curious, did they not find anything because it didn't exist, or they just didn't find it?
Well, you know, this is Watergate, Jim, and Watergate's got all these currents and eddies off to the side. Dr. Fielding swore when he appeared before the Irvin Committee that he found Daniel Ellsberg's files on the floor, that they were really in his office, and he doesn't know whether they read them and threw them down there, but the Cubans certainly reported they didn't find any file.
Oh, interesting.
So we don't know. We don't know if Ellsberg. Now, I mean, to finish it off, Ellsberg had stopped going to that shrink. It was just his first wife, from whom he was estranged, that told investigators that he used to go to the shrink.
Yeah.
So, they're pursuing endless leads because the leak of the Pentagon Papers was big stuff, but they aren't successful.
So these plumbers bust into the Watergate office complex, right?
No, we're gonna be. Remember, I'm a lawyer and I'm a.
No, I know. That's why you're on here, Geoff. That's the reason.
Liddy comes back, reports a failure of the Fielding break-in.
All right.
John Ehrlichman says, I didn't approve a break-in. I approved a covert effort to read the file. That doesn't mean it was illegal. Get this Liddy guy off our staff. So Bud Krogh, my immediate supervisor, is tasked with the idea of saying goodbye to Gordon.
All right.
What he chooses to do is to foist Gordon onto the president's lawyer, John Dean, as a really talented guy. Dean's looking for a good lawyer, and Bud says, "Have I got a deal for you?" Now,
hold it, Geoff. Hold it just a second. So they dumped Liddy off of the re-election committee and then sent him to the White House?
No, the reverse. Oh,
okay. All
they
right.
dump him off the White House and send him to the re-election committee.
Got it. Okay,
now,
very good.
Let's take a couple steps back.
Yeah.
There's no end to this, Jim.
I know. There isn't.
They're going to start the campaign.
Yeah.
Re-election campaign. first big decision, do we run it out of the White House or do we run it out of a separate organization and keep real close tabs? And they decide a separate organization. It's going to be headquartered, kitty-cornered across the street from the White House, 1701 Pennsylvania Avenue. And they're going to staff it with people from the White House and from the Department of Justice, because John Mitchell, who ran Nixon's 68 campaign, will resign as Attorney General and run his 72 campaign. Bob Haldeman asks the president's lawyer, John Dean, to put together a campaign intelligence plan. Now, those words sound pretty innocent, but they're not. It's the spy organization. Every campaign has one. Today, it's called opposition research.
Yeah.
We want to know all about our opposition.
Right.
Maybe we can find he was arrested for drunk driving years ago. Maybe we can find he really wasn't a command sergeant major.
Right.
So we do all this research to get ready, and we're doing it on research on every possible person, not just one. So John Dean goes about trying to decide how to do that. And that's when Bud Krogh foists Gordon Liddy off on him. He's got to get rid of Liddy. Liddy's a loose cannon, but John Dean hires him to do the campaign intelligence plan, sends him over to the reelection committee. Now, those of us who worked in the Nixon White House insist this wasn't the plumbers going over to the reelection committee, because the plumbers continued, but just without Gordon. What happened at the reelection committee was a totally separate initiative to spy on the Democrats during the election.
Right.
And
that was the idea, right? To keep it separate.
Well, the spying was supposed to be legal. An example, I believe we had in the McGovern campaign getting reports from the driver who drove the candidate to the campaign event. So he'd get a sheet the night before, 9:00, be here. We're going to depart at 9:15. We're going to go to 32 West New Hampshire. Well, he would tell the reelection campaign, we know where McGovern's going to be tomorrow. Now, you didn't want to run into him, but maybe you wanted to arrange a demonstration.
Yeah.
So that doesn't violate a criminal law.
Right.
And I think that guy, I think he really existed. And I think he was called Sedan Chair 1.
Mm-hmm.
But what Liddy, that wasn't Liddy's idea. Excuse me. What Liddy came up with was specific proposals that were off the chart. Mugging, bugging, kidnapping, prostitution. And they didn't adopt all those ideas. But Liddy was so proud of them, he details them in his autobiography with a loving detail. Look how tough I was. Look what I was prepared to do to make an impression on these campaign guys that I'd go way over the edge. I was really committed to doing Nixon's reelection dirty work. And they could count on me to do this stuff because I knew some pretty tough guys and I could really bring them to bear in this campaign. Well, here's the innocent Republicans not having any idea what he was doing. But that's what he was hired to do. He had stationery printed up. The name of the whole program was called Gemstone, isn't it? Stationery printed up, so if he was going to relay information he obtained through a wiretap, he'd type it up on Gemstone stationery. Yeah, but I think way too carried away. Way too carried away. Now, we go to Daniel Patrick Moynihan. Pat Moynihan grew up in Hell's Kitchen in New York. He became a sociology professor at Harvard, liberal Democrat.
Yes.
But Nixon hired him as one of his first counselors. And they used to, talk and have fun. And Pat brought 6 guys, talented guys from Harvard with him, and was a real fresh breeze blowing through the Nixon White House. We were willing to talk about liberal ideas. Maybe they will solve the problem. We were going to solve problems. Didn't have to be conservative.
Well, that's kind of what I meant when I said before about disruptive presidents. It's like
Absolutely true.
And
let me tell you Pat's admonition, and then we'll go to disruptive. Hold the thought. Pat said to me, toward the beginning of the Watergate unfolding, he was our ambassador to India just before he became our ambassador to the United Nations. And Pat said to me, Geoff, this business we're in, this business of politics, it attracts some crazy people. And there's nothing you can do about it. They'll get in because it's a voluntary organization. The issue is what you do when you first get an inkling, you've got a nut on your side. And that's where we dropped the ball. Gordon Liddy, in my view, was certifiable. I recognized it. I opposed him coming on the White House staff. I fought it tooth and nail, and I lost. And then he did this crazy plumbers thing, and then he goes over to the re-election committee and causes huge problems.
So I don't know this guy, but my general impression is that he was brilliant and crazy. Is that pretty much it?
Well, after he got out of jail, he ran he had a talk show in Washington, D.C. And he comes across during the talk show as a very knowledgeable, thoughtful guy. They didn't know Gordon like I knew Gordon. I knew Gordon from my White House fellowship year at the Treasury. He was being fired from the Treasury for failure to follow instructions. He was going out on his own, causing no end of troubles. And they were going to fire him. They did fire him. And unfortunately, my boss picked him up and hired him onto the White House staff. Now, you can have crazy people down further in the organization. Maybe their craziness doesn't come to your attention. Let me give you an analogy. It's not a perfect analogy. It's an analogy. We have a popular idea today called DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And after the George Floyd problem, lots of companies, lots of institutions said we ought to have somebody here who's in charge of DEI. So they hire somebody. Well, the somebody they hire isn't quite sure what is part of the job, and they may get carried away in their proposals. They may issue a dictionary of terms you can't use. They may say we got to have meetings, cheer sessions. We got to require our people when they interview for a job or before they get promoted to demonstrate and describe their commitment to DEI. So the CEO could say, we want to keep this down to a low roar. We don't want to make headlines with your proposals. But the DEI person was hired to cause trouble, to cause disruption, to go to conferences of other DEI people and dare each other to do stuff. Well, that's Gordon Liddy. Gordon Liddy is hired to spy. And you say, now, Gordon, calm down. We really don't want you to kidnap anybody. But Gordon says, I'm gonna prove something. I'm gonna make a great impression. I'm gonna be so aggressive, they give me a senior position in the next administration.
Yeah. So was it his idea then to actually bust into the Watergate to get this?
Absolutely, without question.
Okay.
And that's where he separates with Howard Hunt. Hunt says, career CIA. He says, this is nuts. This is high risk, low reward. Larry O'Brien, the chair of the DNC, he's already gone down to Miami for the convention. Yeah. Why? And you're right. It was the second one. They went in successfully. Yeah. They planted microphones, and the microphones didn't work.
Right. There was apparently one important one went hooey, so they went back to replace
it. You had to have, in that era, before emails, before computers, before cell phones, you had to have line of sight for the radio transmission to work, and they didn't have line of sight. So they went back in June 17th, 1972, to fix that, and they got caught red-handed. So I've uncovered all these documents, dozens and dozens of documents. I showed you the books on the shelf behind me. Out of camera, I got two giant lateral file cabinets, 16 linear feet of documents and analysis of Watergate, 27,000 hours, all put together trying to reconstruct what was going on with Gordon Liddy over there. Well, it's in retrospect. You see, unless they were willing to fire Gordon Liddy, he wouldn't stop with his spy program. So you had this never land, just like many companies have today, where you can't calm down. If you want to stop reading about yourself, you got to eradicate.
You put that together very well. I have to thank you. That's quite an analogy.
Well, I wake up thinking of parallels. My poor wife.
Yeah. Okay, so I got another question now.
Yeah, sure.
So, it's the from what I understand, the general consensus of historians is that Nixon did not know about these break-ins. Is that correct?
Yes, I think it's I would say undisputed there. But let me give you the little nick.
Yeah, please.
It's very now. Gordon shows up at the re-election committee. He says, "I've been promised $500,000. I'm going to run the spy program, and maybe $1 million." And the guy over there who's acting chief of staff, a guy named Jeb Magruder, he says nobody has the budgetary authority to commit to $1 million. We got to go see John Mitchell. He's coming someday, but he's not here yet. We got to go over to the Attorney General's office and get his permission from a budgetary point of view.
Yeah.
So,
and also, I want to point out to the viewers, in 1972, $1 million was a lot of money.
Huge amount of money.
Right.
It's a big amount of money today.
It is, right, today, but still, it was way huger than
that. There's a meeting in the AG's office. John Mitchell, Gordon Liddy, Jeb Magruder, who's acting head of the re-election committee, and John Dean, because John Dean's in charge of campaign intelligence. He's recruited Gordon Liddy. And Liddy comes with a stack of charts prepared by the CIA that describe Gemstone. Now, they don't approve it in that meeting. He's asked to calm it down a little bit. Now, calm down, Gordon.
Yeah.
So he comes back for $500,000 6 days later. They don't approve it at that meeting either. But later, when this group, Liddy's group, is caught red-handed in the Watergate office building, anybody at that meeting, either of the two meetings, same four guys, they're at risk of prosecution. So that's where the cover-up starts, because they might have known. Now, it's never been shown. Back to the White House. Gordon never met or saw John Ehrlichman, Bob Haldeman, or Dick Nixon. Dick Nixon never knew about this campaign intelligence plan, and neither did Ehrlichman or Haldeman.
Did Nixon find out at some point?
He reads in the paper they got arrested.
Right.
Nixon has said, and John Dean has said, the first time John Dean told him any specifics about the cover-up was on March 21st, 1973, when John Dean goes in and says there's a cancer on the presidency. Very famous speech.
Yeah.
Happen to have a transcript right here on my desk. But that's the first time Dean's running the cover-up. First time he told Nixon any specifics. People have been, there's a cancer, it's mutating, it's growing, and it's going to get worse because people have perjured themselves and others are going to have to if we don't address this. And by the way, we're being blackmailed by Howard Hunt. And we're worried he's going to reveal the Fielding break-in if we don't give him more money. Okay, so you got to decide, are we going to give him more money?
You being the president.
You being the president.
Yeah.
The only one that can decide this.
Right.
Meeting goes on for an hour and a half. we got a good tape. Tape's an Oval Office tape. Pretty much we know what they said.
Mm-hmm.
They go round and round and round. What if we pay? Only to buy time so we can bring this out ourselves. What if we tell them to pound sand? What if we wash it out right now? What if we bring in a consultant to tell us how deep we are into it right now? Some lawyer, respected lawyer who can find their way out of this maze that John Dean has now told me we're in. Okay.
All right. Hold it. Can I go on? Can I ask you a
Oh,
question?
I got 2 more points real quick.
Okay, go ahead.
There's no question that Nixon flirts with the idea of paying the blackmail. Now, only to buy time to bring out the facts on their own. The way to beat Hunt's blackmail demand, his threat to expose this, the plumber's break-in,
Right.
is for the White House to expose it themselves.
Right.
Then you can't blackmail.
Right. That's, yeah.
But they don't make that decision. Nixon says, how much would it cost over time to keep these people quiet? And Dean says $1 million.
That's how much money. That's how much money Hunt wanted.
No. He only wanted 120,000.
Okay.
He wanted 72,000 for legal fees and 50,000 for humanitarian expenses for his family.
Yeah, to live
They've
off.
been paying both of those all along.
Yeah.
Legal fees, humanitarian aid, but Hunt is asking for the 50,000 in advance,
All right.
not after incursion. And what he says is, look, come Friday a week from now, I go before Judge Sirica and I'm going to be let off in handcuffs. If I don't see that money on Wednesday night, I'm going to have to reevaluate my options.
All right.
He doesn't say I'm going to tell about the fielding break-in.
Right.
But, people speak in code.
Right.
So Nixon says $1 million. I know where we can get it. Okay. But he doesn't say go get it. This is $1 million over time.
Right.
Okay. He doesn't say go get it. The only decision made at the meeting is get John Mitchell down here from New York. Let's get in the same room and decide what to do. Do we hunker down? Do we flush it out today? And the prosecutors will tell you the idea of paying Hunt is discussed 10 different times. And Nixon never says we can't do it. But you can tell if you read it, if you read the words, and I transcribe the tapes, and I've been over that tape 100 times, what he's thinking when he says $1 million, that's not that big of a thing. The problem is once you start to pay, there's no end.
Yeah.
That's why this is just a guess.
Right.
You'll be paying people till they die.
Right.
You can't do that.
Yeah.
Only thing we can do, and there's a second meeting at 5:00 that afternoon, and he's made up his mind. He says, I'm going to call for a new investigation, and nobody is going to get executive privilege. Everybody's got to go testify. Now, they believe that John Mitchell knew about the plan and may even have approved it. Okay? So they think if we call for a renewed investigation, we're sending the president's best friend off to walk the plank. But that's what they're going to do.
Yeah.
And he says to Dean, you go, they said it the next day, but it's the same thing. You go to Camp David and you write a report that I will use to call for a renewed investigation. You put in writing what you told me on Wednesday morning, the 21st. Dean goes to Camp David. He can't write the report because it will incriminate him. He comes down from Camp David. He hires criminal defense attorney and he flips. And he approaches the prosecutors eager to sell out his former colleagues.
Is your opinion that John Dean is an evil little weasel?
Without question.
Uh-huh.
Not particularly little. There's a oral history that I came across that's in the documentary. We got to talk about that documentary again for a second.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it is.
Let me finish this up.
Go ahead.
The archivist at the Nixon Library in 2007, this is 40 years after Watergate,
Yeah.
interviews in an oral history the lead FBI agent who conducted the entire FBI investigation from the morning of the break-in to the end of the cover-up trial. There's a guy named Angelo Lano, lead investigator.
Mm-hmm.
He's talking to the archivist, and the archivist says, "What about the cover-up?" And he says, "I credit 95% of the cover-up to John Dean." I mean, right there. And
Yeah.
I didn't know about that till very recently, but that's in our documentary. We got, and the other thing that's in our documentary, one thing, and then there's one thing that's not. He says, "What about Woodward and Bernstein? You know, didn't they help you?" And he says, "No, not a bit. They were only reporting what we already knew."
Right. If anything, it was the opposite.
Didn't they give you leads? Didn't you get leads from them? This is the archivist.
Yeah.
And Lano says, "No, not a one." Did we give them leads? Thousands.
Yeah.
They didn't help us. They were reporting what the government already knew. So the thing we didn't put in the documentary, which I find fascinating, you remember there's all kinds of conspiracy people who believe the break-in itself, the DNC break-in, was a setup and was controlled by the CIA. I don't get into it because I have no personal knowledge. I knew Liddy, but I didn't have anything to do with the break-in. I know what the prosecutors did, how they cheated in their paper trail. But Lano says in the beginning of this oral history, he says, you know, the Cubans had 2 hotel keys on them, both for rooms.
I'm sorry, 2 what?
Hotel keys, room keys.
Yeah.
For rooms in the Watergate where they stayed when they were planning the break-in.
So they stayed in the Watergate while they
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I went to one room and a colleague went to the other. He says, and you know, you open the room and there laid out on the bed is all the evidence you could ever hope for. Their ID, their wallets, the uncirculated $100 bills, the other incriminating evidence. And we even found a letter that was addressed to a country club in Washington with a return address in Miami. And what was happening was Howard Hunt wanted the Cubans to take this envelope back and mail it from Miami because he was faking non-resident address to get a cheaper rate from his country club. Okay? How petty is that? Well, we learned about Howard Hunt first thing that morning. We actually went to his home and tried to interview him on Saturday morning. You know, we had the whole case.
Yeah.
He says, it's very peculiar. Never seen a case like that in my life. We had this money. We could trace the money down to Miami. We got to Bernard Barker's bank account, you know, before 2 or 3 hours had passed. Then in the second tape of this oral history taken in 2007, he says, is there anything that remains unresolved? He said, well, what I told you at the beginning of this oral history, it was just, everything is too neat. You've never had a case like that. And I think one of 2 people, both career people with the CIA, Howard Hunt or James McCord, who was caught red-handed, I think the CIA was all over this thing. I mean, and, you know, you sit there and say, son of a gun, if the lead FBI agent thinks that after consideration for 40 years, there's something there. Now, that's not my issue.
Yeah.
There's nothing inconsistent with my issue, which is the guys who really sank Nixon were the prosecutors cheating with the judges.
Right.
But that doesn't mean the CIA. I maintain this, and you triggered me when you asked the question. Nixon didn't know about the break-in in advance. The most Haldeman might have known is he asked for a campaign intelligence plan, and on his tickler file, he was told one has now been drafted. But no specifics, never been shown any specifics in advance of that break-in. But the CIA knew. They prepared the damn charts.
Yeah. So, but this is the part if you're going to go with that conspiracy theory, and I'm a conspiracy theorist, so I have no problem doing this, but my problem with that is that the guy who caught them, Frank Wills, the security guard, you'd have to assume they're going to get caught. And they didn't get caught the first time. So what is the assumption? I mean, if they don't get caught, you don't have a story. You know what I mean? It's like that's
there are two books. There's a whole bunch of books, but the two key books by Jim Hogan called Secret Agenda details all these strange things with the CIA, and Silent Coup by Len Kolodny. And they're fascinating books. I don't have any way to approve or disapprove, but Hogan in particular, with the CIA, details all these things that James McCord did seemingly to assure they'd be caught. He puts the tape on around the door to tape it closed instead of on the edge of the door where it wouldn't be seen. Tape's removed, he puts up the tape again.
Right.
Well, no wonder the night
tape off, and then the tape shows up again. Right. Exactly.
Well, no, Frank Willis took it off.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Right.
Yeah.
He took it off, and it showed up again.
It's no wonder he called the police.
Yeah.
And then what happens is the police show up in an unmarked car that just happens to be 2 blocks away. And one of the theories that I find attractive is McCord wasn't supposed to be caught. The team had 2 goals. The Cubans were supposed to photocopy the documents. McCord was supposed to fix the microphone, the phone tap, and get his ass out of there.
Yeah.
And he didn't count on the unmarked car getting there so quick. The guy across the street, the listening booth, his walkie-talkie didn't work. He couldn't alert the people, and they got caught red-handed on the 7th floor of the DNC office of the Watergate office building. All these peculiar things, much like the Trump assassination attempt. So many questions.
Yeah.
We'll never put conspiracy theories to bed. That break-in, it looked like the Keystone Cops.
Yeah.
It had to be deliberate. And then there's the guy trying to swallow the desk key. I mean, it's just your viewers can go crazy with that.
Yeah.
I leave that alone. I have no expertise to bring.
Right.
My expertise, and it's the focus of the documentary, is on the paper trail I've uncovered. We bring in judges, we bring in law professors to comment on the importance and the significance of what we've uncovered. Oh, so what? The prosecutors met with a judge. Well, that's huge. That's just huge. You can't do that.
Yeah.
You ask any lawyer. Lawyers caught discussing the case with a judge, they'll be off the case, prosecutors, and the judge will be off the case. It is a open and shut violation of due process.
Hey, Geoff.
You've got a paper trail showing at least 10 instances of Sirica meeting with the prosecutors.
If we're going to go into, regardless of whether the actual break-in was a setup or not, at what point did the collective hive mind of the Democratic Party decided, we can use this to get Nixon out of office? Did you get any sense of that sort of transition to that at all?
Well, yes. The arrests occur early Saturday morning. The White House Re-election Committee put out a press release on Sunday saying don't have anything to do with it. Edward Bennett Williams, prominent lawyer for both the Washington Post and the Democratic National Committee, starts preparing a civil suit and files within a day or two, as I understand it, a 300-page complaint and starts deposing White House people like mad to lock their stories down before they can concoct excuses.
Did you get disposed?
No, I wasn't there.
Oh, yeah, I know.
I'm innocent, Jim. You keep
implying. No, I know.
I got a clearance letter.
No, Geoff, I know you're innocent. That doesn't mean they're not deposing people. You know what I mean?
My boss is the head plumber. His secretary has now been my wife for 50 years. Gordon Liddy is up the hallway. John Dean is down at the end of the hallway. Chuck Colson is across the hallway. I'm right in the middle of the forest fire,
You are.
but I'm not connected with the campaign.
Yeah.
I'm innocent.
Uh-huh.
I'm innocent. Now,
No, I know. I know.
there's 3 key tapes. I transcribed the tapes. 3 key tapes. There's the 18.5-minute gap, June 20th, 1972, 3 days after the arrests.
By the way, do you have any theory on what that is?
I do, and we're going to get to it in just a minute.
Okay. All right.
Second most important tape is the smoking gun tape, June 23rd, 1972. That's where Nixon agrees, get the CIA, tell the FBI not to interview these 2 people. And the cancer on the presidency speech from John Dean, March 21st, 1973. Now, we've gone over that one.
Yeah.
Go to the 18.5-minute gap. I work directly for the president's top lawyer. I become his deputy. Okay.
Yeah.
He tells me we've discovered this gap. Got to do something about the gap. And we don't know how to explain it. But I think we can explain it. I think that the machine, the tape machine is broken. That's what causes the buzz. Now, I've brought I've brought the tape recording expert from the National Security Agency. And we've gone to Rose Wood's office. She's the one initially transcribing the tapes.
Right.
I polished Rose's initial cut. We've gone to her office, and he can make the tape recorder buzz, but he can't testify in court. Your job.
Why is that?
He's a national security expert.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
He's a spook.
Right.
We don't put spooks in court.
Right. Okay.
Your mission, should you choose to accept it.
Yeah.
This is the day after Thanksgiving. Your mission is to find a tape expert civilian who can cause the buzz, testify in court. Go at it. So I call a hi-fi shop. Who knows the most about tape recordings? Oh, that's Westinghouse. They wrote the book on it. Call Westinghouse. Who knows the most about recordings? And they give me a name. You know, you get the White House to place these calls. You come in with some authority. And then the general counsel of Westinghouse calls me. He says, we don't want any part of this. And he says, now, we're a defense contractor. We don't want trouble. We don't want to play. I said, look, no tapes. We're only playing with copies. We know what the answer is. He just got to come duplicate it. You know, it's repeating a scientific experiment. You promise. No tapes. No tapes. Guy flies in on Saturday. I take him to Rose's office. Look I'm 27 years old. I go into the West Wing. I got a pass with an outsider to the president's own office, the Oval Office, where his secretary has a desk. And I go into his secretary's office. Nobody stops me. It's been cleared.
Yeah.
And the room she was working in is so small, the tape guy sits at the desk and I stand at the doorway.
Yeah.
Okay? Too small to even go in.
Right.
Can't make it buzz.
No shit.
No shit. So he's going to go home with an instruction book, not the tape recorder, but the instructions, and see if he can read it and figure out what's going on.
But your NSA guy did get it to buzz, right?
That's what I'm told.
Yeah.
Okay. Comes back the next day, but I'm doing something else. I have some other crisis. So my colleague walks him over. Can't make it buzz. He goes home. Not too long after that, the government decides the tape recorder itself is evidence. Who touched the tape recorder? Well, not me. I never went in the office.
Well, actually, you didn't. That's right.
No, but this poor sucker, this poor guy from Westinghouse, dragged before the grand jury, dragged before the Irving Committee. Boy, was that general counsel pissed.
Yeah.
And what they discovered was the outlet, the dual outlet where you plug in two things, was faulty. The tape recorder was faulty. It had a broken, what's called a bridge rectifier. I don't know what it does. I only know the name. Do you remember what a tensor lamp was?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. very, very intense light consumed a lot of amperage.
Right.
If the tensor light was plugged into the same outlet, dual outlet, as the tape recorder and turned on, and the tape recorder was activated, there'd be a buzz. But remember, the tape recorder is broken. So the panel appointed to look into this said, well, shit, the tape recorder's broken. So they send it out to a hi-fi shop, and the guy says, well, the bridge rectifier's broken, so I replaced it, and I threw away the original one, and I cleaned it. I cleaned the machine for you. Well, they can't. They've now destroyed the evidence.
That's right.
They can't admit that.
Oh, they can't.
You might wonder why nobody was ever indicted. It went to the grand jury.
Yeah.
And it came down to one of three people, Nixon or his personal assistant, Steve Bull or Rose Woods. And they concluded there had been 6 and maybe 8 deliberate erasures. Okay. But they never indicted anybody, nor did they come out and say, well, we kind of messed up and the evidence isn't usable and we don't dare bring the prosecution. It will become public that we messed up. So it remains a little kernel that will never be solved because they're dead. So about 2 years ago, I was talking for the first time in detail with the president's personal assistant, a guy named Steve Bull. Now, I knew all these guys. We've been having lunch once a year. We get together, we talk, but we never could talk about Watergate at the time because I was on the defense team and you didn't dare talk to anybody else. Their name might come up.
Right.
Well, I couldn't talk to anybody, never did. But I got to talking to Steve Bull about the gap. And he said, after Nixon resigned, there was this article in the newspaper that I read out west, and it told the story about a transcription service. This lady had a service for dentists. The dentist would operate or do something, and then they would phone in to her service and record his notes. She'd transcribe them and give him back his notes for his files. And the damn machine kept coming up with gaps. And the dentist will say, I said stuff that's not back in their notes. And if you can't straighten it out, we're going someplace else. So she had the phone company, the C&P telephone company. She had the tape recording company. She had the police come in. Big article. And what they found out was on this particular machine, a UR 5000, had complex software. And if you messed with it, if you fooled with the machine, jury-rigged some other attribute it didn't come with from the factory, when you pushed the back up, reverse, it would intermittently erase while it reversed. Mm-hmm. And you wouldn't know it.
Yeah.
And the article went on to say, same blessed machine was being used by Rose Woods. Now, what they did with a transcribing service, they jury-rigged the recorder to start when the telephone rang. So there's no human being involved. Doctor calls the number, beep, and it starts recording.
Right.
With Rose Woods, they jury-rigged a foot pedal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And nobody thought to test the effect on the software. And besides, they fixed the machine, so wouldn't do any good today. Half a page article. And Steve said, I cut it out. This is September 3rd or 4th. Nixon only resigned the previous month because the prosecutors were leaning all over me. And I said, here's a possible explanation. This may be the reason. And they refused to accept the article. They said the time for investigation has passed. We're deciding who to indict, and we're thinking about you. So you just keep that article to yourself. And Steve told me this year and a half ago.
Did he get indicted?
No, Steve was never. He went before the grand jury, but he was never indicted. I said, Steve, we got to find that article. So I started doing research, and I found the article. It's in the Orange County Register, front page. And I sent it to the Department of Justice in connection with my plea that in light of everything I've uncovered, they should investigate what those Justice Department lawyers did. And I got a letter about a year later from asking them to investigate. 11 follow-up letters. They're all on my website. And they said, too long ago, those people aren't here anymore. We take no responsibility for what they may or may not have done. We decline to investigate. So when you get to our website to purchase the documentary, that's www.watergatesecrets.com, you'll find we have a call to action. We're asking for two things. We're asking, one, for a DOJ investigation of the wrongdoing, because we don't think those verdicts can withstand scrutiny. Even at this late date, we don't think they can withstand scrutiny.
Yeah.
The other thing we want to know, remember back, they got the grand jury information for prosecution, criminal prosecution. They're going to send it up to the Hill. But the other thing they did was they named Nixon an unindicted co-conspirator. Devastating to his reputation. Lots of people thought the jury had convicted him. We wanted to know, when they did that, what did the prosecutors tell the grand jurors? We don't think that Nixon did anything that would cause you to name him a co-conspirator. And we petitioned the judge to unseal that portion. Now, the secrecy of grand jury information goes to witness testimony. We aren't asking for witness testimony. We're asking for what the prosecutors told the grand jurors. The record says, no, grand jury. We appeal it. No, grand jury. It goes to the Supreme Court. The case is U.S. v. Nixon. They appealed directly to the Supreme Court for the tapes, for 64 additional tapes. We appealed at the same time a request they be required to disclose what they had told the grand jurors. The court granted certiorari on both. They agreed to hear both questions. And then after they wrote their opinion upholding the subpoena for the tapes, they dismissed the certiorari grant for revealing the grand jury information. They said that had been improvidently granted. That's the phrase when they've changed their mind. Years later, 2011, some professors decide they want to unseal Richard Nixon's testimony. His testimony, everybody's testimony is secret except for Dick's.
Hold it, just a second. Richard Nixon testified before the grand jury?
Yeah, nobody knows that. After he resigned.
Oh, after he resigned, okay.
He's then pardoned by Jerry Ford.
Yeah.
He goes out to California. The prosecutors, after blood, say, look, every citizen has to give testimony. He's too sick to come back here. His doctors have certified that. We will fly 2 members of the grand jury out there and depose him. Okay, and then they can come back and read it in front of the grand jury.
Right.
So on June 24th and 25th of 1975, they go out and question him. And 6 days later, the grand jury expires and nothing happens. But these professors, mainly from Harvard, they want to get that grand jury information unsealed because they want the president to use it against Trump. But back when they first started, this was just a bunch of 30 historians. I entered the case, sought to enter, and filed an amicus brief and said, look, you're going to undo Dick's grand jury, undo everybody's. You know, sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander.
Yeah.
And the judge back east, hearing the case, chief judge of the D.C. district courts, said, no, that's too broad, but I'll let you narrow your request. Now, I put it in separately, aside from the amicus brief, so they couldn't say, well, that's not before the court. I put in my own petition.
Yeah.
And he didn't rule. I narrowed it to the same exact request we'd asked for in 1974. Tell us what the prosecutors said and release the roadmap. And he didn't rule on it. And he retired as chief judge. And then in 2018, these Harvard professors said, we want to release the roadmap because we think that'll be good precedent for Trump. And I called up the clerk and I said, I've had a case pending for over 5 years to release the roadmap. And the then chief judge, there's been some turnover, said to the archives, what part of the roadmap has become public, but not as the roadmap? What kind of testimony has come out? What else has happened? And the archive said about 85% of what was sent to the Congress as a part of the roadmap has become public. So she said, well, let's release that. And then you tell me who'd be hurt if I release the rest. So these Harvard guys, their case hadn't even been filed long enough for the government to be required to respond. So the only case that's pending, that had been pending since 2011, is my case. So the ruling comes down on my case. If you go, and it's posted on the NARA website, you look up at the top in red, it says unsealed by order of the chief judge, October 11th, 2018, and then it lists my case.
Yeah.
So for the first time in 45 years, we can learn what the government accused Nixon of having done. And we're right back to it's one of those 4 caches of information. So what they didn't agree to release the roadmap, but I'd also asked them to release what the prosecutors told the grand jurors to get them to name Nixon a co-conspirator.
Yeah.
And the judge declined to do that. And the department called me and said, we've been asked to prepare an order declining to do that. And I said, this is not witness testimony. This is DOJ. It's been 40 years. Sorry, that's her request. So I said, what if I withdraw the case? What if I withdraw that part of my petition? Well, that'd be great. Then there'll be no adverse ruling. That exists through today, Jim. We've never learned what the prosecutors told the grand jurors that caused them to name Nixon a co-conspirator. And that's our other demand. The Department of Justice must go in. 50 years. We don't think it's there. It's not in the roadmap. We think he went in and said, well, we've talked to you for a month. We've brought you all this evidence. Now it's time to act. We want you to give us permission to name Nixon when and if we choose to do it, which is highly improper anyway. But that's what we think we'll find, that there was no specifics. Now, remember the Constitution, to impeach has to be treason, bribery, or other high crime or misdemeanor.
Right.
What did they tell the grand jurors? What did they tell? We don't think it's there. So our documentary doesn't end on that, but if you go on the website and you sign the petition, or you have the opportunity when you buy the movie to list your email address, so we can put pressure on the Department of Justice. Now, we've already asked this department, and they won't touch it. It's embarrassed the Democrats. But if there's a change of administration, a new attorney general, maybe a Republican, in light of what I've uncovered, in light of the dozens of documents, the other interviews that are going on, the belief amongst Americans that these terms, deep state, fake news, false narrative, and most of all, lawfare, that those names, those terms may not have existed during Watergate, but what they described did. Lawfare didn't start with Trump.
Yeah.
Lawfare started with Watergate, and I can prove it.
Right. I got to bring something up, Geoff, and you should be aware of this too. It's kind of important. The domain name for your website isn't WatergateSecrets.com. It's Watergate Secret, singular.
I know.
Yeah. So, I just want to point that out to people.
Jim, this is our first time through.
Yeah. Okay.
We've never produced a movie before.
Right. I understand.
The original website still is Watergate Secret. It's singular. The original poster, it's a very pretty poster. It said Watergate's '*S secrets.com.
Yeah.
Both have been changed, but the way the technicians changed the website, when you put in Watergate Secrets plural, it automatically takes you to Watergate Secret, because there is no Watergate Secrets. It's delivering you to the new website.
Yeah. Right.
So you're absolutely right. I'm the documentary is based on my research, but just like I didn't go into Rosewood's office, I'm not running the website.
No one's expected to know everything, Geoff. Hey,
Well,
Geoff,
it's just the website's overwhelmed.
yeah.
It's
Well, that's
crashed
the
a couple
thing.
times.
I tried typing in Watergate Secrets plural because I
Automatically goes over.
No, it didn't work. So, and I think that's because, like you said, I think it's because you're overwhelmed with traffic. I think.
We're getting complaints. We
Yeah.
put the playwright, the writer of the documentary, we put his website address on that website.
Yeah.
So you can write him, you can email him and say, I can't get through. And then it goes right to the technicians.
If you have a couple more minutes here, I want to actually play the trailer. Okay.
Oh, I think you should. I think
And
now
we'll both be on the screen at the same time. But here you go.
Okay. No, that's fine.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
Till now, the story of Watergate stood unchallenged.
There's been a lot of revisionist work done by scholars since then. People like Geoff Shepard have gone and gotten the records of the Watergate special prosecutor.
No one had really told our side of the Watergate story.
The documents are scary. They're written in the hands of the special prosecutor himself.
Did anybody see you come in here?
They detailed secret meetings with a judge, arguments over who they should indict. It'll curl your hair.
Judge Sirica apparently believed he could call in prosecutors or they could talk to him anytime they wanted.
Good thinking.
I've been attorney general, I know. You appoint a special prosecutor, they think they've got to come up with something, and they can ruin lives that way.
The only reason I was a target was to get to the President of the United States.
Let's talk about Mr. Dean for just a second. No, you're no fall guy in the Watergate scandal.
I have the impression that you don't know everything I know. That's right.
And we've spun him into a whistleblower.
You're going to bribe a judge, don't put it in writing.
They all have a power that nobody can stop to help bring down the president.